Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, your consciousness transformation guide and originator of Trinity Energy Progression, bringing you this week's Living the Shift. I just wasn't sure where to start today. I'm fresh back from an amazing trip to Glastonbury, England, that I had a great group of 13 amazing beings there with me. And so, so much to talk about, so much still processing. There is just it was funny, like getting to the place of what we were going to talk about today, because it's like, well, how do you cull it down from a bajillion different things that we talked about and discussed and experienced, and things that seem to be the theme right now. So one of the biggest topics in the spiritual community is, what is consciousness? What is enlightenment? What we expect it to be, what we think it is. And the funny thing is, that's all ego, right? It's all what we think. When we say we think or what it's supposed to be, that is something that's created from the ego with expectation and separation-based, duality-based kind of energies. So, good morning, Michelle. Thank you for joining. So this came up a lot in conversation and in Glastonbury, and we had just as always, other dimensional experiences and everything else, but where we really get together and immerse ourselves in this perception, in the energy of wholeness and completion, and we realize things that look different than in everyday life. So when we look at consciousness, we think, well, and enlightenment, what do we think of? We think of the Buddha, we think of Jesus, we think of any number of beings that are known for a certain kind of energy. And so there's a theme that carries through all of them. And as I teach Trinity, and Trinity is all about coming back to that remembrance, coming back to that place of enlightenment. And that's what it truly is. It's truly about remembering that there is nothing to gain. There's nothing to attain that's outside of us, that it's all within us, and it's something that's for us to remember. So, and we talk that a lot in the spiritual community. And I hear it all over the place. We have memes about it. We pass on information about it. We know it, yet we have so many levels of denying it within ourselves that we're sort of blind to it in so many ways. So I look around, we have all these wonderful toys. I call them toys. Wonderful toys and practices, tools. So, whether you want to call them crystals or crystals, or, tarot cards, divination cards, sound healing instruments, pharmaceuticals, all kinds of things, right? And our first effort is to remember how, like getting our bodies back into alignment, right? And where that comes from, when you're looking at it from an energetic standpoint, is really what we're holding on to energetically that's holding us in a place of density and separation that prevents that alignment. So when we're really looking at from the bigger picture, we're looking at, okay, so that's all ego based, which is not bad. It's just what we have pursued in this experience and experiment in such density and separation in this part of our consciousness. So when we start looking at those things and we start shifting them, right, we then start to shift them. We can shift them energetically as we let go of things that we hold on to emotionally and physically, spiritually, environmentally, meaning like how our life is and things like that. And we start to see things from a bigger picture, because then what happens is this: it is a natural progression for us to start being more intuitive and seeing things from a more holistic standpoint, because we are not blocking ourselves from seeing things. Because when we hold things in ourselves, which we do, when we're holding them energetically, we're holding them physically as well. We block ourselves in some way, shape, or form from seeing or changing or doing something because of expectations of what we think should be, what we think we should do. And so it becomes this self-fulfilling cycle of expansion, because the more we release, the more we can see, the more we see, the more we release. And I don't even like saying the word release. I like saying the word resolve and complete and integration. So when we do that, we naturally become more able to see the bigger picture. Our intuition becomes much more powerful, and we can feel from a place of, we start to be able to remember how to feel from a place of oneness. Now, this is all from the standpoint, the beginning standpoint of recognizing that we are all part of this one divine consciousness of the universe. What do you want to call it? God, source, the universe. There's like a million different names for it. Yeah, higher self, the I am, and also all faces of the divine that we call like ascended masters and angels and archangels and all that kind of stuff. Just different facets of us, right? From this whole, when we look at it from this whole perspective. Now, I've been doing this consciously and consistently for a long time, like every day, every moment. That's my commitment to myself. So it's easy for me to see things from that perspective. And I understand, at different stages in our development understanding, we only can see so much because of what we have blocking our view from ourselves, right? Which is why we give ourselves messages. This is funny. It's sort of like, wow, this is turning into like a 101 on consciousness. But anyhow. So the first commitment for us is to commit ourselves to taking responsibility for our own energy, for where we are energetically, for what we're holding on to, and finding what tools that support us and align us, that we can start accessing that ourselves. This is where we have sometimes the biggest challenge in taking the next step. The next step is saying, like, because the first thing is, because we have all these blockages and all these things that cause us to believe certain things and hold certain energies within ourselves, is I have to go to somebody else because they have to show me. They have to show me how to do it. Or they have to do it for me because I want the magic pill and, oh, this is just uncomfortable. I want to stop. But, and here's the thing. So many of us, we get into that pattern and we get into that addiction of the magic pill, of somebody else fixing something for us, that we then become we get into we are in general collectively in this really big, deep pattern of denial within ourselves. And what's underneath that is that believing that we're not believing that we are the ones that heal ourselves, which we are. One thing that is so important, and I teach this to everyone I teach, everyone who is even becoming a professional practitioner in energy healing of some sort or another, I impress this. And when I teach Trinity and like in the retreats, we talk about this. No one heals us but ourselves. Our journey is our own. Because if something else did heal us, then it would be consistent across the board every time. So it is our choice. All consciousness and presence here is our choice at some level. When we can fully start, and that's a worthiness thing, when we start to say that I'm worthy and I am God and I do have that ability, then we can start to allow ourselves to take those reins. Until then, we continue to look outside of us. We continue to ask other people to do things for us, to give us their advice, to tell us what to do, and here's the addiction in the spiritual community. I'm going to take another class. I'm going to read another book. Somebody who I feel is very valuable, or whatever, they have the answer more than I do. Somebody who made these amazing cards. And I'm not saying that they don't have brilliant answers, because they do. Because we are expressing ourselves in our embodiment. And the more we remember, that's why it's so beautiful. And everything that's sort of coming out and coming into play in this dimension right now. But the step that we seem to forget is, like, we get stuck in the addiction of all these pretty shiny things, all these really cool, things outside of us, and what I always say is tools are great, but they're not to be crutches. And that's unfortunately where we're in the habit, is crutching ourselves, saying, I have to use this to have this kind of awareness. I have to, take drugs. I have to use this this whatever, I have to, do this incantation or this ritual, or I can only access this kind of energy this way. And it becomes, it's so deeply embedded as a habit that we get into this. Good morning, Sandy. That we don't even realize that we don't realize what we're doing, right? We can talk about, oh yeah, I have all the power within, I have all the knowledge within, I am the divine, I can access it as soon as I let go of all these, separations and partitions. But I'm still going to ask everybody else for how to do this. I'm going to have somebody else, I'm going to go to a healer and have them heal me because I believe that they do that somehow, that in a way that I can't. So the key is in the beginning is to, number one, stop not to judge yourself, right? Number two is to get to a place of recognizing, starting to do that self-work and self-focus to clear out all those spaces, right? And yes, that's where you do take classes, or sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just know how to do it. And more we're getting to that place because it just comes to us. And if we allow it, the key is if we allow it and we don't have the ego shut it down and say, oh, I can't do this, I have to go to the doctor. Oh, I can't do this, I have to look it up on Google. Like we joke about that, like Google that. Google that stuff. And so we go to do that. And what I start teaching people is, okay, so the next step is, first is having the awareness that there's all these different tools that are around, right? The second step is to then step back at some point as in our development to say, like, all right, I've taken all these classes, I've read all these books, I've had all these experiences. Now I have to start trusting my own guidance. Like I can access, I'm starting to access that better. And as we do that, it's stepping in to say, so is this my truth? Is this truly going to work for me? And that's where you still talk to somebody, you still look at other things, you still use tools, and you can step back and say, is this my truth? Will this work in my situation right now? Will this work to help me shift my energy in the situation to flow forward from now? And all we need to do is get into that place where we can start trusting the yes and no, the guidance from the inner self. And once we do that, then we start getting bigger and bigger pictures, because when we get no, you get some other guidance, you get some other message. And yes, everything around us is a message. That's why then it's important is to discern the messages, right? So there's this whole cycle of where we then get into a place where we are that's where many seem to get stuck, because we get into the addiction of the thrill of the new class, the new book, the new toy, right? And it's like, because it feels good, it feels shiny, and maybe it's at an energy or vibration we're not at yet or whatever. And so the key is then to recognize and to get into a practice at some point in some way that allows you to start focusing in on yourself, focusing in on the abilities coming from within and accessing that energy, accessing that vibration as you, from within you, and knowing that nobody knows your journey as well as you do. Nobody heals you except for you. Nobody heals us except for ourselves. And so when we can recognize that, then we can take out all the middlemen. And that is what I understand consciousness and enlightenment to be. Enlightenment is, I am fully present in my being. I am fully aware and fully knowledgeable without the need for anything outside of me. And it's not a matter of attaining that. It's a matter of remembering it, because it's the stuff that we hold that keeps us in separation and exclusion and blocking ourselves from seeing things, whatever. That's what prevents us from remembering that we're already enlightened. We are already consciousness, because that's what we are. So, how do we do that? Well, it's flexing a muscle, right? I was talking, and this came to me when we were in our retreat, and came to me one morning because we did yoga every morning because we did so much walking. I think we did like 32 miles. According to somebody's, tracker, like 32 miles of walking in 7 days. So we did yoga every morning. It was great to stretch the muscles, to get the body physically moving energetically, right? And in yoga morning, this came to me because it was something I had been like looking at, right? And had been coming up in conversation. So if you start doing yoga, right, you have personal reasons for doing yoga or any kind of exercise. Like I do martial arts, I do kung fu, and I've done others before that. We all have different Tai Chi. We have meditate, like we have meditation. No, I want to talk about the physical part, the yoga and all kind of stuff. So if you started doing yoga, right? And you said, I'm doing yoga to improve my health. And I hired somebody to do it for me because they're a professional in yoga. So I'm going to have them do yoga for me every day. You would laugh at somebody. Like you would laugh if somebody said that to you, right? Because it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Because part of yoga is getting into the practice of like dropping into our bodies and being aware of our energy flowing. And if we hired somebody else to do that, how would we do that? Now, we might hire somebody else to show us like alignment, help us with alignment because they do have that more remembrance or whatever for the time being, right? But if I just sat and said, I'm not going to do it myself, I'm going to have you do it for me because you have the magic pill on doing yoga because you've been doing it for so long. What do I get out of it, really? But watching it. And then, we start doing yoga. We use props and tools, right? We use blocks and straps and whatever. But typically, and typically the goal is to eventually see how we get to that place without having to use them and that progression. And it's one day at a time, one moment at a time, one session at a time. So it's the same thing. So it's like anything else that we do. If we don't flex the muscle or we don't use something, then of course, it's going to be hard or challenging for us to do. So it's the same thing with consciousness and spiritual awareness. It's the same thing with intuition and accessing our divine abilities and our knowing from this bigger whole level. It's going to a place of saying, well, so like, what do we do? How do we do that? Well, that's where we talk about starting meditation. And then I get people all the time. They're like, oh, I can't meditate. I just can't. Blah, 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 blah. Well, it's like saying I can't do yoga. I'm just never going to try it, even though I'd love to do it. Or I may I've tried a couple times and my body felt great, but I can't do it. It was uncomfortable. Right? And people do that too. But this is what we do. I know. And yoga is a great example because yoga is actually sort of a moving meditation. It helps us to move energy. It brings things up from the cells, allows us to have awareness of them. And it allows us to go beyond, do a mind consciousness over body, a consciousness over physical kind of thing. But in the beginning, when you start, it's like, oh, the mind tries to like resist. The body tries to resist. You're not in the practice. It's very uncomfortable. And there have been times I've stopped and then started again. But I've noticed that once I get past a certain point, what happens is that it starts to be almost addictive. Like it feels really good and expansive, and I feel much more comfortable in my own skin, much more centered, much more aware of everything within. Well, that's part of the same thing of like, that's really the same thing in meditation. And that's another muscle, even though it's not our physical muscles, which it is in a way, because it encompasses everything. But it's listening. When we get into meditation, we start looking within. And it's not just meditation, but it's also remembering, doing whatever we need to do to remember how to manipulate our own energy, to change our energy, to do it and know that we can do it with our consciousness and consciousness only if we so choose. That's a big step, because once you do that, you realize you can do anything. You realize you have this, and again, centeredness, clearness, clarity, flowing, this idea of wholeness, this perception of everything in its everything in its perfect place in the symphony of this multiverse that we've created. And then all of those things that we talk about as outside of us or needing to work on or practice, that come naturally. So then you don't have to take 4,000 classes anymore. You don't have to go to this class about, learning how to, like, we don't have to go learning how to, let me think of something. How to do telepathy, how to do psychic, what's that? What do they call it? Seeing, astral projection, past life regression, journeying. I mean, we can call it whatever we want to call it. There's so many different things in so many areas. Psychic, like psychic work and things. Because as we come back into the wholeness, all that stuff is natural. It's not supernatural. It's not outside of us. It's not something we have to learn. It's something we already know. I know that the longer I'm in a place of oneness, and those who I share the place of oneness with, right? We have this fluid, natural telepathy that we need no effort to put into. And it's so effortless. It's so like there's so many in the circle of, say, the Trinity practice, because that's where I put a lot of my effort since, I originated, but also that I know that that's part of the foundation of the practice. And the more anybody practices it, because that's a tool for somebody to get to a place where they realize, oh, wait, no, this is just me. There's no tool needed, right? But when we get to that place, it's so we're all connected. And so we naturally just know. I'll just know. I don't necessarily have to think, oh, I have to call this person, or, like I have to talk to them every day or whatever. But all of a sudden I'll just know it's time to talk to them. Reach out to this person. Or somebody will just start popping up into my consciousness, and I might have not have talked to them for 6 months. And people think, oh, well, that's sort of odd if that's a friend or somebody you think is close to you. And I'm like, but the thing is, they're always with me when we're in oneness. When we're in oneness, we're never apart. So then you just start to feel each other energetically, and when you need to be in each other's like physical reality, and when you don't need to, it just is, right? And there's no ego about that. Because it is all that ego, and we're like, oh, well, and that's all expectation. Oh, well, I should, if this person is this kind of role to me, I should call them this many times a week or this many times a month or whatever. And instead of the shoulds, anytime, I always tell people should, could, should, must, can't, have to. Those are all ego words. So I'm always like, listen to yourself when you say that to yourself, because it's all energies based in separation. What we're going to in this consciousness and enlightenment is the remembrance of wholeness. And that separation is wholeness within the wholeness. The separation is within the wholeness. So as wholeness, you can see all the bits and pieces, and you don't need to, like navigate through them at the ants level, the anti level. And that then goes into, like, there's so much about, I was talking about this yesterday on my preview. Oh, Anne says, seems like I've heard this before. Thanks as always. Yeah, and we get it when we get it, right? I saw somebody had forwarded on a text or a post to me from somebody the other day that said, oh, I just realized I don't need to take any more classes. I don't need to read any more books. I'm already like conscious. I'm already evolved. I'm already like, and I know that I have the answers, and I know that they come to me, and I know I continually expand within my own energy. And so, like, I know that I'm going to continue to evolve, and, whether you want to call that enlightenment or not, doesn't matter. And that's what this person's like, that's what that is to me. I'm like, bingo. And it was like, yeah, I know, I've heard this a million times, and now it's finally, I finally get it, right? I finally understand it. And that's what I always tell people is you get it when you're ready to get it. And sometimes you got to say it 5,000 times. You got to hear it 5,000 times. You got to read it or whatever 5,000 times. But how much easier would it be for all of us if we just trusted that? And part of it has to do with the word wholeness sort of scares us, even though we say we love it, right? And the scaring thing comes from the ego and fear. Because when we accept wholeness, when we truly accept wholeness, we accept that the separation is within us as well, because that's what we've chosen in creating this multiverse. But it's only an illusion of what we wanted to create in learning and expanding and whatever we chose to do with it. So the thing that scares us is then we cling on to this idea of being a light worker, of being of the light, and my goal is to be like all light, for everybody to come to, and all that kind of stuff. Well, really, that's a hidden thing by the ego, saying, I don't believe that, for me to be worthy, I believe that I need to be seen as something that is like attractive and desirable to everybody else, which is the light, right now, for many, because we judge it as good and we judge darkness as bad. And so we then are still denying ourselves 50% of who we are, because my understanding is this: in the wholeness, when we created duality, light was created as to oppose the dark, to be the balance with the dark. So without the dark, there is no light. Without the light, there is no dark. And when we're in wholeness, there's neither. There's both and neither. And so we get to this place of saying, when we get to that place of focusing on wholeness versus on being the light, on being the whole of divine consciousness, is beyond light. It's beyond dark. It's accepting that both are equally powerful and not existent, equally existent and non-existent within our multiverse. And when we can do that, that's like a big, huge step, because I've come across and talked to people I love and who are brilliant, amazing beings of consciousness, and say to me, oh, well, I don't have any dark in me. I don't have any dark in me. I'm only the light. I don't have any of that. And it's like, well, but you're being triggered by something that you don't believe, you're denying something of yourself. Because if we're in separation, if we are embodied, we do have separation as part of who we are. And that's this part of the consciousness. This is part of the consciousness that's embodied now. So that is a big thing that prevents us. Actually, the funniest part is the more we focus on having to be the light, to be the light worker, as the end result, the more we are limiting ourselves from true enlightenment and from remembering our divine consciousness, because it's getting beyond that to accepting all of it. And when you accept all of it, the power of both individually goes away, and the power of the whole becomes far more brilliant. The whole prism of the rainbow, of the bajillions of colors that we have in the multiverse that we've created, or the vibrations and frequencies, they are all part of the separation that make up the symphony, make up that one amazing note, right? And I think it's the Hindu belief system that says the whole universe was created with one note, right? Which is Om. I think that was Hindu. Can't remember which one. There's so many I've looked at and understood over the years. Anyway, but so in that one sound, that one note, that one frequency, we created all the separation, right? We created frequency. And the beauty of it is the separation. The beauty of it is all the facets together to make the rainbow, to make the prism. And so it's for us to get past the need to focus and only be one thing and not the other. And it's not saying you're going to be like some, wicked, nasty, whatever. It doesn't that's even judgment on itself, because everybody's got a different perspective of what that would be. So really the key is coming back into yourself and coming to a space. And it sounds so cliche, because it is cliche right now, but I've been talking about this since before it got cliche, so I'm taking it. It comes back to unconditional love for the self. Unconditional love. Unconditional love means I accept myself as the whole. I accept myself as the separation that I've created within me, and as the embodiment, the separation that I created to make this embodiment. And I also accept myself as whole and enlightened and conscious and amazing and infinite. And when I can do that, I don't have to limit myself through one path or the other. If I only accept the light within me, I'm denying 50% of what I've created of myself. It's when I accept the whole that I come back to consciousness as the divine that I am. So the first place to start is coming to that place of unconditional love. And that's that self-work. That's that self-focus. That's looking within and trusting and letting go, resolving. Like I said, I don't like letting go. I don't like the term letting go. I like to use more like resolving, completing, integrating, accepting, seeing the bigger picture. If when we see things without judgment, we see them from a much different perspective. And so this is a lot to have packed into a half hour. But where it starts is looking in the mirror and saying, I am God. I am divine. I'm whatever you want to call me. I am the universe. I am the universe in me. I am. And when we can start to believe that of ourselves, we stop needing to push it outside and get it from other people, like from needing others to tell us that. We get to a state of being. And when we're in the state of being, then we do from our being, and we don't do to be, but we just are. And then the doing comes from that. And then we start living from a place of unconditional love, which is really what my understanding is, like what the whole multiverse really is, right? That singular consciousness. And that's beyond the emotions of what we define in the 3D. And the thing is also for us to allow ourselves to expand our consciousness and understandings, to allow ourselves all possibility beyond having context in the 3D. And when we do that and allow it to come to us organically and naturally and in wholeness, then we see the bigger picture so much more clearly. And that's enlightenment. That's consciousness. So start within and look at the habits where you are externalizing that and giving your power away to others. And really, like I said, I always tell people, like, the great intermediate step is, well, to get into the basics of getting to ask your higher self, like learning to ask your higher self the answer without the ego intervening. And that would mean there's no emotion with the answer, right? The emotion indicates the ego. When there's anger or anxiousness or whatever, that comes from ego. But if it's a very calm yes or no, and that comes from that meditation, there are many guided things. There are things I can teach you, many others can, on how to hear the yes and no from the higher self. And then you can just start discerning, is this for me? Is this my truth? Is this part of my consciousness? Is this something for me to pay attention to? Will this do what I'm asking for it to do or wanting it to do? And when you can take that extra step, you're taking the power into your own hand, because you're listening to the messages that are coming from others, but then you're like taking that extra moment to say, wait, is that the way I'm supposed to be seeing it? Is that the way I'm not supposed to? Is that the way for me to see it? Is that the way, or is there a different context for me to understand? There have been many times I've gotten messages and visions and whatever that had no context. And early on, when I was practicing this consciously, I would misinterpret often. And now I just sort of put things on a shelf when they come in, and I let them sit there and say, okay, so when the context comes together, I will have clarity on what that means. And I always do. So things to start practicing. The more you do it, it's like I said with yoga, the more you do it, the less you need for tools, the less you need the outside help, the more you can simply flow with what you're guided, and you automatically know the way your body wants to move, what's there to do. It's the same thing with intuition, with inner knowing and guidance. So the thing is to just start practicing and start knowing that, like saying, okay, so I'm going to find the way for me to access this myself, my own knowledge, my own remembrance, and commit yourself to it. And it's not easy, because I want to say it's not easy. It's typically not easy because we're in such a habit of not doing it. So it's a matter of breaking a habit and starting a new one. And I guarantee you, once you start the new one, once you really commit yourself and trust on that, it becomes really easy and you become very guided. So on that, I'm going to let you go. Thank you for joining me. Be conscious this week. We'll see you next time. This is Angela Coulter bringing you this week's Living the Shift. Have a good one.